rock sat in the ground for 4 billion years. Dull, reddish-brown, heavy, completely unremarkable. Farmers stepped over it. Children kicked it aside. Builders used it to fill gaps in walls. Nobody looked twice, because it looked like nothing. Just dirt pressed hard, the earth itself, and buried inside that rock was the material that would one day hold up the tallest buildings ever built, carry freight trains across continents, form the hulls of ships that cross oceans, and get hammered into the machines that pull people out of poverty. For most of human history, the rock just sat there. The real question isn't simply how we found iron, it's how an ancient person with no chemistry, no periodic table, no university, and no tradition to follow could look at a dull red stone and, through fire, accident, and thousands of failed attempts, pull a metal out of it that Stone Age technology had no business producing. The answer starts not underground, but in the sky, the world before iron. For nearly 2 million years, human technology meant stone, flint, obsidian, quartzite, sharp enough to cut meat and skin animals, but brittle. One hard blow against bone, and a stone axe shattered. Once broken, a stone tool was finished. Roughly 5,000 years ago, people in the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean discovered they could smelt copper, heating certain greenish rocks until they surrendered a soft, shining liquid metal that hardened into whatever shape they chose. But pure copper is soft. A copper blade bends rather than cuts. Then came a second discovery. Mix copper with tin in roughly a 9-to-1 ratio, and you get bronze, harder and tougher than either metal alone. Bronze ran the ancient world for nearly 2,000 years. Bronze swords, shields, plows, chisels, the first cities, the first writing, the first empires, all built on an alloy that needed 2 ingredients, and that was the problem. Copper was abundant, tin was not. It existed in only a handful of places. Parts of Britain, Central Europe, Central Asia, so Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Aegean depended on fragile trade networks stretching thousands of miles. A single war or a sunken merchant fleet could leave an entire civilization without the material for its most important tool. The element that would solve this problem was sitting in the soil beneath every one of their feet. They had no way of knowing it. Iron makes up more than 5% of Earth's crust. It's in mountains, river sediment, and the reddish clay soil found almost everywhere on the planet. And yet civilizations that mastered bronze, built pyramids, and wrote legal codes could not do a single useful thing with it. The reason? Iron on Earth almost never appears as a metal. Unlike gold or copper, it reacts strongly with oxygen and rusts away over geological time. What ancient people saw when they looked at iron ore wasn't a hidden metal, it was rock, because, as far as their experience told them, it was rock. Metal from the sky. There was one exception, and it came from space. Nickel-iron meteorites, fragments of the metallic cores of shattered asteroids, occasionally survived the fall through Earth's atmosphere. They were denser than ordinary stone, magnetic and dented rather than shattered under a hammer. Everything about them was wrong for a rock, and ancient people knew it. In Egypt, iron's hieroglyphic name translated to metal from heaven. Sumerian texts called it metal from outside, from beyond. Hittite documents called it the black iron of the sky. Across cultures separated by thousands of miles, the same conclusion emerged independently. This material was celestial. The earliest iron objects in the archaeological record predate the actual Iron Age by more than 1,500 years. Hammered not from ore, but from meteorite fragments, beads recovered from a pre-dynastic Egyptian cemetery, dated to roughly 3200 BCE, tested with nickel concentrations that are the unmistakable signature of a meteorite. Tutankhamun was buried with a dagger whose blade contained nearly 11% nickel, matching a known meteorite recovered near the Egyptian coast. The king of Egypt,
armed with a blade fallen from the sky. During the Bronze Age, this meteoritic iron was rarer than gold. Assyrian trade records show it selling for up to 40 times the price of silver by weight. It appeared in palace inventories beside jewelry, given as gifts between kings. But ore iron, the iron that would eventually remake the world, needed something else entirely to unlock. It needed a fire that didn't yet exist. The 400-degree problem. Copper melts at 1085 degrees Celsius. Bronze, thanks to its tin content, melts even lower, around 950 degrees Celsius, well within reach of Bronze Age kilns, which routinely hit 1000 to 1150 degrees Celsius. Iron melts at 1538 degrees Celsius. That roughly 400-degree gap wasn't a small engineering hurdle, it was a different category of problem entirely. When early metalworkers placed iron-rich rock into copper furnaces and waited for liquid metal to pool, nothing happened. The iron just sat there, red-hot and stubbornly solid. Every reasonable inference said iron was a useless rock. The path forward wasn't one discovery, it was generations of furnace refinements made for entirely different reasons. Charcoal, nearly pure carbon, burned hotter than raw wood. Tall, enclosed clay shafts created a chimney draft that pulled in more air, raising temperatures further. Leather bellows, pumping air directly into the base, could push a furnace past 1200 degrees Celsius. None of this was designed with iron in mind. Bronze smelters just wanted more efficient furnaces, but the cumulative result was a furnace capable of something its builders never intended.
The accident. At some point, a copper smelter added iron-bearing rock to a furnace, maybe intentionally as a flux to purify copper ore, maybe because the furnace itself was lined with iron-rich clay. At 1000 to 1200 degrees C, that ore didn't melt, but something else happened. Burning charcoal in a partly enclosed furnace produces carbon monoxide instead of carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide aggressively strips oxygen from oxide compounds. Rising through the shaft, it met the iron oxide in the ore and pulled the oxygen atoms away, not melting the ore, but chemically reducing it, transforming it in solid form into metallic iron. What came out wasn't liquid metal pooled at the bottom. It was a spongy, porous mass called a bloom, dark, dull, riddled with trapped slag. But when struck with a hammer while still hot, it didn't shatter, it bent. It was metal. Something new was in the world. Ancient smelters learned to run this process with remarkable precision, despite having no theoretical framework at all. They judged ore quality by weight and color, read furnace temperature from flame color, and learned the bellows rhythm and slag viscosity that meant a good run. None of it was written down. All of it passed through apprenticeship, observation, memory, and craft. From sponge to sword. A raw bloom isn't usable iron. It's porous, soft, riddled with slag. Turning it into something useful was the blacksmith's job. While still near white-hot, the bloom was hammered again and again, squeezing slag out, collapsing internal gaps, fusing iron particles together through solid-state diffusion, and refining the crystal grain. The result was wrought iron, tough, bendable without fracturing, workable without needing tin shipped from across the world. But wrought iron alone couldn't beat well-made bronze. The final piece came from another accident. Blacksmiths noticed that iron left in contact with burning charcoal for strengths of time came out harder and stiffer. What was actually happening? Above roughly 900 degrees C, iron's crystal structure shifts into a form with gaps just the right size for carbon atoms to migrate in from the charcoal. Iron absorbs carbon. Add less than 1% by weight and you get steel, which, quenched rapidly in water, locks into an extremely hard structure called martensite, hard enough to cut bronze with ease. Blacksmiths didn't know why, they just knew which heating times and quenching routines produced the harder blade, and they refined those techniques over centuries. When bronze collapsed, for centuries after ironworking emerged in Anatolia and the Levant, roughly 1500 to 1200 BCE, it stayed a secondary technology. Bronze still dominated trade, prestige, and infrastructure. Then, around 1200 BCE, catastrophe hit. Within roughly 50 years, nearly every major Eastern Mediterranean civilization collapsed or was severely disrupted. The Mycenaean palace system disintegrated. The Hittite Empire ceased to exist. Coastal cities burned. The causes are still debated. Climate stress, internal upheaval, mass migration, but the result is not
not. The tin trade routes collapsed, and bronze became scarce and expensive. Metalworkers turned to what was locally available. Iron ore was everywhere. Bloomery furnaces could turn it into usable metal without a single import. A transition that might have taken centuries under stable conditions was forced by necessity, and iron proved to be more than a substitute. Once carburized, quenched, and tempered into steel, it was harder than the best bronze, held an edge longer, and resisted fracture better. And it was cheap. A village with a furnace and a blacksmith needed no imported tin. A common soldier could carry an iron spear. A peasant farmer could own an iron plow. Metalworking knowledge spread out of palace workshops and into ordinary communities, changing agriculture, warfare, and the distribution of productive power across entire societies. It's no surprise the blacksmith became a figure of near mythic status across cultures. Hephaestus and Vulcan in Greek and Roman tradition, Ogun among the Yoruba, Goibniu in Celtic myth, the dwarf smiths of Norse legend. To anyone without chemical knowledge, turning dull red rock into a blade sharper than anything before it looked like magic.
Iron technology didn't spread from one origin outward. It emerged independently with genuinely distinct innovations. Chinese metallurgists, by the 6th century BCE, built furnaces hot enough to fully melt iron, producing cast iron, and by the 1st century CE, using water-wheel-driven bellows over 1,000 years before Europe did. Indian smiths developed wootz steel, sealing wrought iron with carbon sources in clay crucibles, later traded as Damascus steel, and unmatched in Europe until the 19th century. In sub-Saharan Africa, smelters engineered tall natural draft furnaces that preheated incoming air, achieving efficiencies not formally understood in Europe for centuries. Iron tools transformed farming. Heavy iron plows cut through dense soils that wooden ones couldn't touch. Iron axes made large-scale forest clearance practical. Iron sickles and chisels put precision tools within reach of ordinary craftsmen rather than just the wealthy. The bloomery furnace was still limited, small batches, labor-intensive, slow. The blast furnace, developed separately in China and later medieval Europe, ran continuously and hot enough to fully melt iron into liquid pig iron. Converting that high-carbon pig iron into usable steel took further breakthroughs. Henry Court's puddling process in 1784 and Henry Bessemer's converter in 1856, which burned off excess carbon in minutes using the heat of the reaction itself. Bessemer made mass-produced structural steel cheap, and the skyscrapers, railways, and ships of the modern world became possible. Modern experimental archaeology has confirmed all of this. Researchers building replica bloomery furnaces with ancient methods reliably produce metallic iron, proving ancient people needed no theoretical chemistry, only observation and generations of trial and error. And popular myths don't hold up. There was no single Hittite monopoly, no lone brilliant inventor, and iron did not instantly outclass bronze. Its real superiority only arrived once carburizing, quenching, and tempering matured over centuries. Stand in a modern city and look up. The steel frame above you, the rebar in the concrete beneath your feet, the bridges, trains, and ships around you. Every gram was once dull reddish rock pulled from the ground, run through a furnace where carbon monoxide stripped oxygen from iron oxide. The chemistry inside a blast furnace today is the same chemistry that ran inside a clay bloomery on an Anatolian hillside 3,000 years ago. Only the scale has changed. The person who first pulled a bloom from a hearth and found that hammering it made metal wasn't standing at the beginning of a separate story. They were standing at the beginning of this one.